More than 500 million years ago, in the primitive oceans of the Cambrian, Anomalocaris was about to set off an explosion. This oldest known apex predator was a monstrous, bug-eyed, shrimpy thing that had figured out a survival strategy so impactful it would lead to the very structures that hold our bodies up today. And that strategy was simple: murder. In this video, we're looking at what Anomalocaris was, what and how it hunted, and why paleontologists have such an unrelenting obsession with this animal's frontal appendages. And stick around for a brief story of the world's most epic turd. Let's begin with a bang. Earth is a lot older than we really have the ability to comprehend. In geological circles, this history is divided into 4 eons, the largest divisions we have so far. Of these 4, we're currently in the Phanerozoic eon, which, despite being the most recent, still began over 500 million years ago. The name means visible life, and this refers to the moment life on Earth erupted, or at least so we thought. The first period of this eon is known as the Cambrian, and it was traditionally considered to be the starting point of life, based on the fossil record showing very little before it, and really quite a lot from that point onwards. It's fun to point out here that as members of this domain we call life, we have a very clear bias, and this is illuminated brilliantly in the fact that traditionally we would refer to everything before the Cambrian as simply pre-Cambrian, effectively lumping 88% of Earth's history into the before category. This bias has been diluted somewhat since, and we now break pre-Cambrian time into 3 other eons to better describe that part of history of our planet. But it can't be ignored that a lot of the incentive for this new level of granularity comes simply from the fact that we discovered life existed back then too. Still, the Cambrian was indeed an explosion of life. Life itself may have been a couple of billion years old by this point, but there's no question that there was a burst of imagination during the Cambrian that saw larger multicellular organisms diversify all over the place, and very suddenly. The first mollusks show up right at the beginning of the Cambrian, and about 10 million years later, the first trilobites. Trilobites were incredible woodlouse-looking animals belonging to a positively ancient group of early arthropods. And from the moment they evolved, they radiated out into tremendously diverse niches all over the world. They also lasted a remarkably long time, showing up in the fossil record around 520 million years ago, and surviving until as late as the Permian extinction 250 million years ago. Trilobites ranged in size from about a millimeter in length to the best part of a meter. Like the pillbugs of today, they had hard, segmented exoskeletons, which is why there are so many fossils of them. And like modern-day pillbugs, they could curl up into a ball. Fossils of trilobites are often found rolled up like this, and it's thought they did so to protect their soft bits from a very dangerous animal. As far back as 510 million years ago, enormous trilobites were apparently trying to defend themselves against some kind of Cambrian monster predator. And in fact, it's thought that these predators, perhaps one of the oldest multicellular apex predators ever to exist, were the reason arthropods evolved to roll up into balls in the first place. These predators were the Radiodonts. Radiodonts were perhaps the first large predators on the planet. They're so named because of their round mouths. Most have a series of tooth cones surrounding the mouth hole, and they were exceptionally diverse in what they put into these mouths. But all are distinguished even more by their elaborate frontal appendages. Radiodonts have characteristic appendages sticking out from the front end, sometimes called claws, graspers, feeding appendages, or even in the flattering language of classical literature, great appendages. The point is, whatever you call it, there's a lot going on at the front end of the Radiodonts, and these appendages are hardened, segmented, and covered in spines. From here, the specifics of these appendages differs between species, and it's a major way to tell one from the other. Perhaps the best known of all these species of Radiodont is Anomalocaris, a genus of animal whose name sounds a bit like a presidential runner-up, but whose relentless predatory lifestyle better reflects the sitting president. Anomalocaris was enormous when compared with everything else on Earth at the time. While the majority of trilobites from this time were less than 5 centimeters long, this beast was up to 10 times that length, and it would have swum through the Cambrian seas undulating with rows of fan-like propelling segments down its sides. Its large fanned tail provided steering and stability as it hunted prey on the seabed. It had eye stalks poking out from its head, with compound eyes thought to be 30 times as complex as those of its contemporary trilobites, and that were, from the time, top of the range visual organs. With over 20,000 lenses, it would have had a resolution comparable to that of the modern day dragonfly. On top of this, some estimates suggest that it could even see in color. This might not sound like much nowadays, but 500 million years ago this was truly remarkable. In fact, when Anomalocaris showed up, it changed the world forever. Soft, simple animals were no longer safe, and a surge in complex predation contributed to a surge in complex evolutionary adaptations to it. And of course, as a radiodont, it had the terrifying raptorial appendages that the order was known for. In this genus, there were at least 14 segments in the appendages, with each segment tipped with a sharp spine, and then each spine had a pair or more of auxiliary spines to back that up with. So this was a well-armed sea monster, especially for the time, roaming around with its infamous appendages coiled ominously under its mouth. While the concept of a predatory sea monster isn't something we think of as novel, it had to begin somewhere, and Anomalocaris was about the closest thing we know of to an original design. This is important in a few ways. Firstly, every apex predator that Earth has ever hosted, from T-Rex to tarantula hawk wasps, from wolves to killer whales, from Dorylus ants to Dunkleosteus, they all got their start here, with a killer arthropod 500 million years old. But let's not get things tangled here. This doesn't mean T-Rex descended from these arthropods. But the very concept of an animal that specializes in killing other animals appears to have first been trialed by this bug-eyed raptor-armed shrimp. And the cascade of evolutionary competition that this triggered created all subsequent predatory strategies, and always will. And it created all sorts of adaptations in its prey too. Just in the way that trilobites evolved to cover their soft bits, animals began investing in shells and spines, burrowing into the sediment, and generally doing all they can to avoid the threat of Anomalocaris and animals like it. Chances are the very skeleton that's holding you up right now can be traced all the way back to a protective adaptation in response to the likes of this Cambrian apex predator. The Cambrian Explosion was where all sorts of evolutionary strategies originated, competed, and adapted in a brand new world of prey and predator interactions. Interactions that would echo through time for more than 500 million years, all the way up to the present day, continuing an unbroken, perpetual helix of evolutionary competition. And all of this began with an impressive frontal appendage. But the raptorial weapons of Anomalocaris may not have been exactly what they seemed. While it was originally thought to have grabbed and pierced trilobites in the world's oldest predatory battles, recent research has brought that into question. To start with, this research doesn't counter any of the ideas of Anomalocaris being an apex predator, but it does bring into question what exactly it was apex predating. Trilobites were the dominant food group of the Cambrian seabeds, and it was assumed until very recently that these were the primary source of calories for our shrimpy hunter. But models were made of those iconic appendages, using references from their arthropod cousins around today to figure out where the muscles would have sat. Using these model appendages, the researchers concluded that Anomalocaris wouldn't have had enough force in its appendages to puncture the shells of trilobites, and could therefore have been going after softer prey. Further, even if it was somehow capable of generating enough force to puncture a trilobite, the spines themselves would be at high risk of shattering, and of the multiple Anomalocaris specimens on record, there's only a single broken spine from a single specimen seen. And a final piece of evidence against the hard-shelled food idea is the fact that Anomalocaris shows no wear patterns on its mouth that you'd expect to see from something that was routinely gnawing on calcified shells. So if these spines were too weak to pierce prey, and too brittle to restrain anything that struggled too energetically, what exactly were they for? It's important to remember that these models are from only a single species of Anomalocaris, so they can't be extrapolated perfectly to the whole genus. But for this species at least, it's possible predation occurred higher up in the water column, and not along the seabed as was once thought. It's also possible the arms were used for raking through the sandy floors, or flipping shelled animals over to get at their innards. This would actually tie neatly into the evolution of the trilobite rolling defense, and avoids the need for Anomalocaris to find a new food source. Perhaps this animal became the first apex predator simply by learning how to turn its prey upside down. Another fun yet completely baseless hypothesis would be to consider that it wasn't really much of a predator at all. Maybe these spined appendages housed delicate nets of mucus or feathery chitin fibers that could be held out into the currents to catch detritus. But the life of a passive filter feeder wouldn't explain the need for such complex eyesight, and it wouldn't be as fun either. And finally, we come to our most fun piece of evidence that Anomalocaris may have been the world's first trilobite killer: its poop. Before we explain, here's a quick thanks for watching, and if you've made it this far, you are greatly appreciated as a supporter of the channel already. We only ask that if you click that like button and add your name to the subscribers, we can afford to keep making videos like this. So please do that too. As any German will tell you, you can learn a lot from poo. And paleontologists don't need a poop shelf to do it. When bones and footprints are lacking, researchers are grateful for the next best thing: coprolite. That's fossilized shit, and all the way back in the Cambrian, some animal took a dump so big that it remained in the sand for 500 million years. In this impressive poop, we find traces of Trilobite, and since the only animals known to have been large enough to drop a log of this magnitude were the Radiodonts, this is a powerful hint that Trilobites were on their menu. But the fact remains that Anomalocaris wasn't likely powerful enough to pierce a hard shell, so either there's another large predator yet to be discovered in the Cambrian sediments, or Anomalocaris used a method of avoiding shells altogether. Ultimately, though, however successful it may have been in its day, the reign of Anomalocaris would be relatively short-lived. Anomalocaris and the Radiodonts were strange enough as it is, but one thing that made them particularly interesting was just how little time they spent at the top. As the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician, this transition was marked by a mysterious extinction event. Trilobites lost a lot of species, and Anomalocaris, perhaps newly devoid of whatever it would have eaten, appears to have disappeared entirely around this time. But the Radiodonts as a whole lived on for a little longer. The Ordovician would become the Silurian, and this transition was also marked by a significant loss in marine life. But complex life by then was getting really good at what it was doing. Some had made it onto land, and vascular plants were already evolving to improve upon their algal and mossy predecessors. The rudimentary defensive skeletons that originated in the face of Anomalocaris had, by the Silurian, evolved into complete bony foundations for fishes, and some parts of these bones had evolved from gill arches into jaws. Sea scorpions, a different line of arthropods, were trying their hand at this predator thing, and trilobites, being the remarkable little water tanks that they were still going strong. But the rest of the Radiodonts wouldn't make it into the next period, or at least not very far. The Devonian, now known as the Age of Fishes, was where the journey ended for the world's first apex predators. As pioneer species, they set the stage for the global ecosystems to come, and as is necessary of pioneers, they would ultimately move aside as that stage was filled by the next generations of intricate, diverse animals, plants, and fungi. One such apex predator of this time was a beast with a self-sharpening bolt cutter for a head, and we have a video on that too, so please feel free to check it out after this one. As for now, that's all for this video. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.